Have you ever been told to forgive someone just to keep the peace, even when every fiber of your being screamed that you weren't ready? Have you ever felt like your pain mattered less than everyone else's comfort? I have. And let me tell you, choosing my own health over my family's expectations was the hardest and most liberating decision I ever made. My name doesn't matter for this story, but what matters is what happened to me, what I endured, and how I finally found the courage to say no to the toxicity that was slowly killing me from the inside. This isn't just a story about family drama or a simple disagreement over Thanksgiving dinner. This is about survival, about recognizing when the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are actually the ones poisoning your soul with their demands for silence and compliance. For years, I played the role of the peacekeeper, the one who swallowed their feelings, the one who smiled through gritted teeth at family gatherings while my heart was screaming in anguish. I told myself it was love, that this was what family meant, that sacrifice and suffering were just part of the package. But deep down, in that quiet place where we hide our most honest thoughts, I knew something was terribly wrong. I knew that the knot in my stomach every time my phone rang with a family member's number wasn't normal. I knew that the panic attacks before holiday gatherings weren't just anxiety. They were my body's desperate attempt to protect me from a situation that had become unbearable. The thing about toxic family dynamics is that they're incredibly difficult to recognize when you're living inside them. It's like being a fish in water. You don't realize you're drowning because you've never known anything else. From the outside, we probably looked like any other family, maybe even a good one. We had our traditions, our inside jokes, our shared history. We took photos together, celebrated birthdays, and posted smiling faces on social media. But behind closed doors, there was a suffocating pressure to maintain an illusion, a desperate need to pretend that everything was fine when nothing was fine at all. And I was the one holding it all together, or so they made me believe. The weight of that responsibility crushed me slowly, day by day, year by year, until I didn't even recognize the person staring back at me in the mirror. I had become a shell, a performance, a carefully curated version of myself designed to meet everyone else's needs while completely neglecting my own. My emotions didn't matter, my boundaries didn't exist, and my pain was consistently minimized or dismissed entirely. Whenever I tried to speak up, I was met with the same tired phrases. That's just how they are. You're being too sensitive. We're family. We forgive and forget. Think about what this will do to everyone else. And the most damaging one of all, we need to stay united no matter what. That phrase, family unity, became a weapon used against me, a tool to silence my voice and invalidate my experiences. It was the ultimate manipulation, wrapped in the language of love and loyalty. How could I argue against unity? How could I be the one to tear the family apart? The guilt was overwhelming, suffocating, relentless. But here's what nobody tells you about toxic family unity. It only works when some people sacrifice their well-being for others. It only functions when certain members agree to be smaller, quieter, less important. True unity can never be built on the suffering of individuals, and yet that's exactly what my family demanded of me. They wanted my silence, my compliance, my willingness to pretend that what happened to me didn't matter as much as everyone's collective comfort. And for the longest time, I gave them exactly what they wanted because I didn't know I had any other choice. Growing up, I thought my family was normal. Sure, we had our issues, but doesn't everyone? My parents were strict but seemed to care about us. We had rules, expectations, and a clear understanding of what was acceptable and what wasn't. Emotions were something to be controlled, not expressed. Vulnerability was weakness. Problems were swept under the rug and never discussed again. What happens in this family stays in this family was an unspoken rule that governed everything we did. I learned early on that keeping secrets was a sign of loyalty, that protecting the family's reputation was more important than individual truth. My siblings and I were taught to present a united front to the outside world, even if we were crumbling on the inside. Appearances were everything. What would the neighbors think? What would people at church say? What would extended family members gossip about? These questions haunted every decision, every interaction, every moment of our lives. We performed happiness like it was a full-time job, and I became an expert at wearing masks. I had different versions of myself for different audiences. The dutiful daughter, the responsible older sibling, the high-achieving student, the friendly neighbor. But none of these versions were really me. The real me, the one with feelings and needs and boundaries, was buried so deep that I sometimes wondered if she even existed anymore. I remember countless dinners where tension simmered just beneath the surface of polite conversation, where passive-aggressive comments were disguised as jokes, where controlling behavior was framed as concern. My mother had a way of making cutting remarks sound like advice. My father's silence was a form of punishment that could last for days. My siblings learned to compete for approval rather than support each other. And I, the eldest, was expected to set the example, to be the glue holding everyone together, to never complain or cause problems. The pressure was immense, but I didn't realize how abnormal it was because I had nothing to compare it to. This was just how families worked, right? This was just what you did for the people you loved. You sacrificed, you compromised, you kept the peace at any cost. But the cost was my authentic self, my mental health, my ability to trust my own perceptions and feelings. I was being trained to doubt myself, to prioritize others' comfort over my own pain, to believe that my value as a family member was directly tied to my willingness to suffer in silence. And the scariest part? It was working. I was becoming exactly what they wanted me to be: compliant, manageable, silent. The family system thrived on this dynamic, with certain members holding power while others learned to make themselves smaller and smaller. There were unspoken hierarchies, forbidden topics, and invisible rules that everyone understood, but nobody acknowledged. To question this system was to commit treason, to prioritize yourself was to be selfish, and to express genuine emotions was to be dramatic or unstable. I watched as family members who dared to speak up were labeled as troublemakers, as the problem, as the ones who just couldn't get along with anyone. And I promised myself I would never be like them, never cause that kind of disruption, never make people uncomfortable with my truth. Little did I know that this promise was slowly destroying me from the inside out. Everything changed on a summer evening that started like any other. We were having a family gathering, one of those supposedly pleasant get-togethers that I had learned to dread but couldn't avoid. Everyone was there: parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins. The house was full of noise and activity, the kind of chaos that feels warm and loving to outsiders but suffocating to those who know what lies beneath. I was in the kitchen, doing what I always did, helping with food preparation, making sure everyone had what they needed, playing my role as the responsible one. That's when my uncle, someone I had trusted my entire life, cornered me in the pantry. The details of what happened next are mine to keep, but I'll tell you this. In that moment, something inside me shattered. The betrayal wasn't just his actions. It was the realization that I was completely alone in my own family home, surrounded by people who were supposed to protect me, and yet I knew with absolute certainty that if I screamed, if I called for help, if I made a scene, I would somehow become the problem. That knowledge paralyzed me more than fear ever could. When it was over and I emerged from that pantry, shaking and barely holding myself together, nobody noticed. Or maybe they did notice and chose to look away, which is somehow even worse. I made it through the rest of that evening on autopilot, smiling when expected, nodding at conversations I couldn't hear over the roaring in my ears, counting down the minutes until I could escape. When I finally made it home that night, I collapsed. I sat in my shower fully clothed, letting the water run over me, trying to wash away what had happened, what I felt, what I knew. And in that moment, I made a decision that would haunt me for years. I decided not to tell anyone. I convinced myself that it wasn't that bad, that maybe I had misunderstood, that speaking up would cause too much damage to the family. All those years of training kicked in, all those lessons about keeping secrets and maintaining appearances. I told myself I was being strong, that I was protecting everyone else from unnecessary pain. But really, I was terrified. Terrified of not being believed, terrified of being blamed, terrified of destroying the family and being labeled as the destroyer. So I buried it deep, that secret that grew heavier with each passing day. I threw myself into work, into keeping busy, into anything that would distract me from the truth that was eating me alive from the inside. But trauma doesn't just disappear because you ignore it. It seeps into everything, coloring your relationships, your self-perception, your ability to feel safe in the world. I started having nightmares, panic attacks, moments where I would dissociate completely, feeling like I was watching my life from outside my body. My health deteriorated in ways both visible and invisible. I lost weight, then gained it back, then lost it again. I couldn't sleep, or I slept too much. I withdrew from friends, from hobbies, from anything that used to bring me joy. And through it all, I still showed up to family events, still played my role, still pretended that everything was fine because that's what was expected of me. The months following that incident were some of the darkest of my life, though nobody would have known it by looking at me. I became a master of compartmentalization, creating separate boxes in my mind where I could lock away the pain, the anger, the confusion, the shame. I went to work every day, performed my duties, smiled at colleagues, and acted like a functional human being. Then I'd come home, and the mask would slip, and I'd find myself staring at walls for hours, unable to move, unable to feel, unable to process what had happened to me. The worst part wasn't the incident itself, as traumatic as it was. The worst part was carrying it alone, knowing that the people who should have been my support system were the very people I couldn't tell. How do you explain to your family that one of their own hurt you? How do you shatter the illusion they've worked so hard to maintain? How do you become the bearer of uncomfortable truth in a family that values comfortable lies? These questions circled my mind endlessly, keeping me trapped in silence. I tried to convince myself that I was healing, that time would make it better, that I could just move forward and forget. But trauma doesn't work that way. It demands to be acknowledged, to be processed, to be witnessed. And the more I tried to suppress it, the more it manifested in other ways. I started having severe anxiety attacks before any family interaction. My body would react before my mind even registered what was happening. Racing heart, shallow breathing, nausea, dizziness. I would sit in my car outside my parents' house for family dinners, trying to calm myself enough to walk inside, telling myself I could do this. I could perform normalcy for a few hours. And the cruelest irony? My family started commenting on how distant I seemed, how I wasn't myself anymore, how I needed to make more effort to participate in family life. They could see I was struggling, but instead of asking what was wrong or creating space for me to share my truth, they pressured me to try harder to fit into the dysfunctional system that was literally making me sick. My uncle, the one who had hurt me, continued to show up at every family gathering, smiling and joking and acting like nothing had happened. Maybe to him, nothing had happened. Maybe he had already forgotten about it, dismissed it as meaningless, moved on with his life while I was drowning in the aftermath. Watching him interact normally with my family, seeing my parents greet him warmly, observing my siblings laugh at his jokes, it all felt like a betrayal, every single time. But I swallowed my discomfort, maintained my silence, and played along because that's what I had been trained to do my entire life. The pressure to maintain this facade became unbearable over time. Every family gathering felt like a performance where I had to smile wider, laugh louder, and act more engaged to hide the fact that I was falling apart inside. My mother would pull me aside with concern in her eyes, asking if everything was okay, telling me I seemed troubled. And I wanted so badly to tell her, to collapse into her arms and let her comfort me, to have her believe me and protect me like mothers are supposed to do. But something held me back. Maybe it was the way she always defended family members, always made excuses for bad behavior, always prioritized unity over individual well-being. Maybe it was the lifetime of evidence that showing vulnerability in my family was dangerous, that it would be used against me or dismissed entirely. Or maybe it was the fear, that primal terror of not being believed, of being told I was exaggerating or misremembering, of having my pain minimized into nothing. So instead, I would smile and tell her I was just tired, just stressed with work, just going through a phase. And she would accept this obvious lie because it was easier than digging deeper, easier than confronting uncomfortable truths, easier than risking the disruption of the family system. Meanwhile, I was screaming on the inside, begging someone to notice how not okay I was, hoping someone would care enough to push past my defenses and demand the truth. But nobody did. They all seemed content with the surface-level version of me, the performance I put on, because that version didn't require anything difficult from them. That version didn't challenge the status quo or force uncomfortable conversations. That version maintained the illusion that we were all fine, that our family was healthy, that nothing was wrong. And I hated them for accepting that version so easily, for not caring enough to see through it, for choosing their own comfort over my obvious suffering. The resentment built slowly, accumulating like sediment at the bottom of a lake until it became this heavy, solid thing I carried everywhere. I resented my uncle for what he did. I resented my family for creating an environment where I couldn't speak about it. I resented myself for being too weak to break the silence. And most of all, I resented the concept of family unity that had become a prison rather than a source of support. I started researching family dynamics, trauma responses, and toxic family systems online. Late at night when I couldn't sleep, I read stories from other people who had experienced similar situations, who had been silenced by their families, who had chosen to protect the system rather than themselves. And slowly, a realization began to form. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't being too sensitive. What was happening to me, what had happened to me, was real and valid and deserving of acknowledgement. My pain mattered, even if my family didn't want to hear about it. The confrontation, when it finally came, wasn't planned. It happened during another family dinner, one of countless occasions where I had to sit across from my uncle and pretend everything was normal. I had been doing better at managing my anxiety, or so I thought. I had my coping mechanisms, my mental scripts, my escape routes planned. But something was different that night. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, casual and unbothered, as if I was nothing, as if what he had done to me had no significance at all. Maybe it was the way my father praised him for some minor accomplishment, clapping him on the back with genuine affection. Maybe it was my mother laughing at one of his jokes, completely oblivious to the fact that her laughter felt like a betrayal to her daughter sitting right there. Or maybe it was simply that I had reached my breaking point, that moment where silence becomes more painful than speaking up, where self-preservation finally overrides fear of consequences. It started small. My uncle made a comment directed at me, something innocuous that would have meant nothing to anyone else, but to me it felt loaded with meaning, like he was testing whether I was still keeping our secret, and something inside me snapped. Not explosively, not dramatically, but like a cord pulled too tight for too long, finally giving way. I looked him directly in the eyes and said, "Don't talk to me." The room went silent. Everyone stopped mid-conversation and turned to look at me. I could feel the confusion, the tension, the sudden shift in atmosphere. My mother immediately tried to smooth things over, laughing nervously and saying something about me being tired or stressed, but I didn't back down. I said, "Don't talk to me," I repeated, my voice stronger now, fueled by years of suppressed anger and pain. "You don't get to act like nothing happened. You don't get to pretend we're all just fine." My uncle's face changed. A flash of something, guilt maybe, or fear, or anger, I couldn't tell. But he recovered quickly, putting on a confused expression and asking what I was talking about. And that's when I told them. Not all the details, not everything, but enough. Enough to make it clear that he had hurt me, that it had happened in their house, that I had been carrying this alone. The words came out in a rush, messy and emotional, not at all how I had imagined this moment during countless sleepless nights. I wasn't articulate or composed. I was raw and real, and finally honest. And the response? It wasn't what I had hoped for, but it was exactly what I had feared. My uncle immediately denied everything, looking shocked and offended. My father's face closed off, that familiar expression that meant he didn't want to deal with something unpleasant. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but not for me, for the family moment being ruined, for the conflict being introduced, for the uncomfortable situation we were all suddenly in. And my siblings, God, my siblings looked at me like I had just detonated a bomb in the middle of our family, like I was the destructive force, like this was my fault. The aftermath of that confrontation was swift and brutal. Within minutes, I went from victim to villain in the narrative my family was constructing. My father demanded to know why I was bringing this up now, implying that the timing made it suspect. My mother wanted to know why I hadn't come to her immediately after it happened, suggesting that my silence meant it couldn't have been that serious. My siblings were angry that I had ruined dinner, that I had created drama, that I couldn't just handle things privately like a mature adult. And my uncle, he maintained his innocence with such conviction that I could see doubt creeping into my family members' eyes. This is the thing about confronting abuse in families. The system protects itself. The people who benefit from keeping things quiet will always find ways to discredit, minimize, or dismiss the person threatening the status quo. I was suddenly being cross-examined at my own family's dinner table, being asked to justify my truth, being made to feel like I was on trial. Questions came from every direction. Are you sure that's what happened? Could you have misunderstood? Were you drinking that night? Are you doing this for attention? Have you been talking to someone who put these ideas in your head? Each question was designed to make me doubt myself, to make me back down, to restore the comfortable illusion I had shattered. I stood my ground, shaking but resolute, repeating that I knew what happened to me, that I didn't need them to believe me, but I also wouldn't pretend anymore. My mother tried a different approach, pulling me aside and begging me to think about what this would do to the family. She talked about my grandparents, about upcoming holidays, about my cousins who looked up to us, about the family reputation. She asked me to consider forgiveness, to think about moving forward, to remember that we're all imperfect and make mistakes. The word mistake almost broke me, as if what happened to me was comparable to forgetting a birthday or saying something rude. But she wasn't done. She told me that holding on to anger would only hurt me. that forgiveness was for my benefit, that family was forever and I would regret destroying it over this. And then came the phrase that would haunt me. Can't you just forgive and forget for the sake of family unity? There it was. The expectation laid bare. My pain, my trauma, my truth, all of it mattered less than maintaining the appearance of a functional family. I was expected to sacrifice my healing, my boundaries, my basic dignity for an abstract concept of unity that had never actually protected or supported me. I looked at my mother, this woman who had raised me, who had taught me right from wrong, who had always said she would do anything for her children, and I realized she meant it conditionally. She would do anything for her children as long as it didn't disrupt the family system, as long as it didn't make her uncomfortable, as long as it didn't require her to make hard choices or stand up to other family members. Being labeled the troublemaker was a strange and painful experience. Suddenly, I was the one with the problem. I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too willing to destroy the family over something that happened in the past. My phone started blowing up with messages from extended family members who had heard their version of events, a version where I was clearly the unreasonable one. They tried to convince me to apologize, to smooth things over, to think about how my actions were affecting everyone else. Some were well-meaning, genuinely believing they were helping me see reason. Others were more aggressive, accusing me of being selfish, attention-seeking, or even mentally unstable. The family group chat that had once been full of memes and casual conversation became a place where I was discussed in thinly veiled references, where people posted quotes about forgiveness and letting go, clearly directed at me. When I finally left that group chat, it was treated as further evidence of my dysfunction, my inability to be part of the family. Nobody seemed to consider that maybe I left because being in that space was actively harmful to my mental health, that reading those messages felt like being attacked over and over again. I started being excluded from family events, not officially, but through convenient oversights. People would make plans and forget to invite me, or I'd hear about gatherings after they had already happened. When I did show up to mandatory occasions like birthdays or holidays, I was met with cold shoulders and tense silences. My siblings stopped calling me. My parents' conversations became stilted and brief, focused entirely on surface-level topics. I had become a pariah in my own family, all because I refused to pretend that everything was fine. The isolation was crushing. I had lost my family, the people who were supposed to be my foundation, my support system, my unconditional source of love. Except it had never been unconditional, had it? The love had always come with strings attached, with expectations and demands and requirements for my participation in their dysfunction. Still, knowing that intellectually didn't make the pain any less real. I grieved the family I thought I had, the family I wished I had, the family I deserved but never got. There were days when the doubt crept in, when I wondered if they were right, if I was making too big a deal out of this, if I should just apologize and go back to how things were. The gaslighting was effective, even from a distance. When everyone around you is saying you're wrong, it becomes hard to trust your own perception of reality. But then something unexpected happened. In the depths of my isolation and pain, I started to find clarity. Without the constant noise of family drama, without the pressure to perform and pretend, without the daily betrayals of being around people who didn't value my well-being, I began to heal. It wasn't immediate or easy, but slowly, so slowly, I started to remember who I was beneath all the roles I had been playing. I started therapy, something I had resisted for years because admitting I needed help felt like admitting defeat. My therapist helped me see patterns I had been blind to my entire life, helped me understand that the abuse wasn't just the incident with my uncle, but the entire system that enabled it, the years of conditioning that taught me my feelings didn't matter, the constant message that I existed to serve the family's needs rather than my own. I learned words like enmeshment and trauma bonding and narcissistic family dynamics. I learned that what I had experienced wasn't unique, that countless people struggle with toxic family systems, that choosing yourself over family expectations isn't selfish, it's survival. I started setting boundaries, real ones, not the kind I had attempted before that were more like suggestions I hoped people would respect. I stopped answering calls from family members who were only reaching out to guilt me or convince me to come back. I blocked numbers when necessary. I created distance, physical and emotional, between myself and the people who were harming me. And with each boundary I set, each time I chose my own well-being over their comfort, I felt a little bit stronger, a little bit more like myself. I reconnected with old friends I had pushed away during my darkest times. I was honest with them about what I had been going through, and their support was overwhelming. They believed me. They validated my feelings. They reminded me that I deserved better. I found communities online of people who had gone through similar experiences, and reading their stories made me feel less alone. I started taking care of my body again, eating properly, exercising, sleeping on a regular schedule. The panic attacks became less frequent. The nightmares started to fade. I began to feel safe in my own skin for the first time in years. Have you ever experienced that moment when you realize you've been holding your breath for so long you forgot what it felt like to breathe normally? That's what healing felt like for me. Like finally being able to exhale. Choosing myself over family expectations was the hardest decision I ever made, but it was also the most necessary. I had to accept that my family might never understand, might never apologize, might never acknowledge what happened to me or how their response compounded the trauma. And that acceptance, as painful as it was, set me free. I couldn't control their reactions, their beliefs, their choices. I could only control my own. I could choose to stop participating in a system that required my silence and suffering. I could choose to surround myself with people who valued me, who respected my boundaries, who believed me when I shared my truth. I could choose to build a life based on authenticity rather than performance. The concept of family had to be redefined for me. I used to think family was about blood, about obligation, about showing up no matter what. But I learned that real family, chosen family, is about mutual respect, genuine care, and unconditional support. It's about people who celebrate your growth rather than punishing you for it, who make space for your truth rather than silencing it, who choose you even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. I started building that kind of family through friendships, through support groups, through a partner who understood what I had been through and loved me not despite my trauma, but as my whole, complex, healing self. There were setbacks along the way. Holidays were particularly hard, those times when the cultural narrative screams that you should be with family, when everyone else seems to have those picture-perfect gatherings I would never have. I had moments of intense sadness, of anger at what was taken from me, of grief for the relationships that could have been if only my family had chosen differently. But I also had moments of profound joy, of peace, of gratitude for the life I was building on my own terms. I discovered parts of myself that had been suppressed for so long I didn't know they existed. I found out I was funny without trying to diffuse tension, creative when I wasn't constantly anxious, capable of deep connection when I felt safe. I learned that I was enough just as I was, without performing or pretending or shrinking myself to fit into someone else's comfortable narrative. My health, both mental and physical, improved dramatically. The chronic tension I had carried in my body for years began to release. I stopped having stress-related illnesses. My energy returned. I could focus on my goals and dreams rather than just surviving day to day. And all of this came from one crucial choice: prioritizing my health over their comfort. Now, looking back on everything that happened, I can see the journey clearly. From that scared person who couldn't speak their truth to someone who refuses to be silenced. From someone who believed their value was tied to family approval, to someone who knows their worth is inherent and unchanging. From someone who would sacrifice everything for the illusion of family unity, to someone who understands that real unity can only be built on a foundation of truth, respect, and genuine care. I won't lie and say I don't sometimes wonder what might have been different if my family had responded with compassion instead of defensiveness, with belief instead of doubt, with support instead of rejection. I wonder if we could have all healed together, if we could have become stronger through honesty, if they could have chosen me the way I needed them to. But those are hypotheticals, and I've learned to make peace with reality rather than longing for fantasy. The reality is that some families can't or won't do the work required to become healthy. The reality is that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away. The reality is that you are not responsible for maintaining relationships that damage you, even if those relationships are with family. If you're watching this and you see yourself in my story, if you're carrying secrets to protect people who wouldn't protect you, if you're being pressured to forgive before you're ready, or to maintain unity at the cost of your own well-being, I want you to hear this. Your health matters more than anyone's comfort. Your truth matters more than their illusion. Your healing matters more than their denial. You are not selfish for choosing yourself. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. You are not destroying the family by refusing to participate in dysfunction. The family system was already broken. You're just refusing to pretend otherwise. And I know how scary it is to imagine life without your family, to face the possibility of being cut off or rejected or labeled as the problem. I know the guilt is overwhelming, the doubt is paralyzing, the grief is crushing. I know because I lived through all of it. But I also know what's on the other side of that fear, and I promise you it's worth it. The freedom to be yourself, the peace that comes from authenticity, the joy of building genuine connections with people who actually see and value you, these things are worth fighting for. You deserve a life where you're not constantly walking on eggshells, where your feelings matter, where your trauma is acknowledged rather than minimized. You deserve to heal. And sometimes healing requires distance from the people who wounded you, even if they're family. So if this story resonated with you, if you've been through something similar or you're going through it right now, please leave a comment below. Tell me your experience, share what helped you, or just let me know you're not alone in this. Understanding the content I've shared today is so important because toxic family dynamics are more common than we think. And the more we talk about them, the more we normalize choosing health over harmful relationships, the easier it becomes for others to make that same choice. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think differently about family expectations or the pressure to forgive, please leave a like on this video. It helps more people find this content and realize they're not alone in their struggles. And if you want to hear more stories like this, real experiences from real people navigating difficult family situations, mental health challenges, and personal growth journeys, please subscribe to Living Through It. We're building a community here of people who refuse to sugarcoat the hard parts of life, who value authenticity over performance, who support each other through the messy process of healing and growing. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss future videos. Because trust me, we have so many more stories to share, stories that might just change your perspective or give you the courage to make the choices you need to make for your own well-being. Remember, family unity should never require your silence, and forgiveness should never be demanded before you're ready. You have the right to choose your health, your peace, your truth, always. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community, and remember, you're not alone in this. We're all living through it together.